welcome to Kapowski Reads, and this week I kind of just want to talk about Death on the Nile, if that's okay. I finished reading Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie, and this is one of my definitely top 5. I say this every time I talk about Agatha Christie books. I haven't ranked them in order from favourite or least favourite to most favourite. I know if I did, that Death on the Nile would be at least in the top 5. So I love this book, and I was reading it for the Read Christie February read, which was a book about travel and romance. And I sort of thought that since I had some time off, I might as well go and see the new film. And today I am just going to talk about the book, how much I love the book. I'm just going to do a mini little review, and then I'm going to talk about the film and how well of an adaptation I think it was. I'm going to try not to put spoilers in for the book and for the film. I don't want to ruin the enjoyment of the book or the film if you haven't read or watched either of them. I also apologise in advance for any weird noises that there are. We currently have a little bit of a snow blizzard storm right now in Aberdeen, so I can hear the weather and I don't know how well that's going to come across in the recording. It really is quite lovely to look at, but only through a window. I don't think I'd want to be outside in it today. So first up we've got the book Death on the Nile, and this book was set in the 1930s, the late 1930s, and it is about a death on the Nile. I would say simple as that, but it is not as simple as that. So on what should be a lovely, relaxing honeymoon cruise, murder ensues. And not just one murder, multiple murders ensue. And unfortunately for the murderer, Poirot is also aboard this luxury cruise liner. So Colonel Race and Poirot are tasked with discovering who done it. And there are multiple suspects, which is something that is what I love about an Agatha Christie murder mystery. The element of the mystery where it could have been so many people. So many people had, I don't want to say a valid reason, because that's sort of like I'm supporting the crime, but they have reasons, and you can kind of see why multiple people could have done it. So the main characters in this book, obviously we have Poirot. I love Poirot. I'm a huge fan of Poirot. He is an elderly, no, I don't want to say an elderly man, because he's in his, at this point in the series, he's about 70, I think. He is famously egg-shaped. Eggs are, you know, strong. He has his quirks. He likes things to be so, you know, just so. He is methodical, he is intelligent, and he's so witty as well. And in this book, Poirot's on holiday. He just wants a break. He doesn't get a break. He's Poirot. Every time he goes somewhere, murder happens and he has to get involved because he's the best detective. So the book is split into 2 parts. Part 1 is relatively short, but it gives an introduction to all of the characters and what brought them onto the cruise liner. The main characters, of course, are Poirot and Lynette Ridgway, who is a very spoiled heiress to the point where she is completely oblivious to any harm that she does to others through her selfish ways. Throughout the first part of this book, there are many references to Lynette and how it's not fair that she has it all. She has the money, the standing, the beautiful looks. She's described as being golden haired and just an absolute babe. I don't think she is necessarily a mean or a nasty character. I think she is thoughtless and she does terrible things and they are terrible, but it's sort of like she doesn't even realise or have any sort of compassion for other people. And that is best displayed when it's described how she's going to knock down some local housing because she wants to put her swimming pool there. And she does say that the housing that will replace the building she knocks down will be better, but she's still knocking down people's homes so that she can have a stupid swimming pool. I think that sort of did a good job at giving an introduction to the character of Lynette. The setting of this book was round about the Great Depression, so the Wall Street crash has happened and multiple people have lost their wealth as a result. Lynette, however, her family have come out on top, and there's a lot of resentment towards her for that, because Lynette's family were responsible for the loss of wealth and standing of some of the people on the cruise. So that played a really key role. We also have Jacqueline De Belfor, who is Lynette's childhood best friend. They went to school together, they're both 20, and Jacqueline is engaged and she is completely in love with her fiance, and she's so passionate, which is shown by when she's speaking to Lynette and just keeps saying, "I'll die if I can't marry him, I'll die, I'll die." And it just shows, you know, the sheer just strength of her love for him. Like, she just couldn't imagine not being with him. She then asks Lynette to give him a job because he is the younger son of a lord and he doesn't have any money. So Lynette very kindly does give him a job as a land manager for her new estate that she has purchased. And then that brings us to our next main character, who is Simon Doyle, and he's the fiance of Jacqueline De Belfor. We then get introduced to a bunch of other characters who are all very interesting and do have quite important roles through the rest of the story. And those other characters include 2 lawyers for Lynette, the American sort of trustee and the English lawyer, a mother and son, Tim and Mrs. Allerton, and they are cousin and aunt of Lynette's other best friend, Joanna. So there's a little link there. There's Miss Van Schuler, Marie Van Schuler, and her nurse, Bowers, and her niece, Cornelia. She is a tyrant of a crabbit old lady. Then there is Salome Otterborn and her daughter Rosalie Otterborn, and Salome is a romance novelist who ends up flirting with Poirot, and it's great fun, and her long-suffering daughter. There is a Dr. Besner. There is Ferguson. He became a communist when he was at a very prestigious university. There's Signor Rossetti, who is an archaeologist. There is Lynette's maid, who is called Louise, and her ex-fiance, who is called Fleetwood. And I think that's all of the characters. I've probably forgotten some key ones, but I think they're the main ones. Part 1 ends with an announcement that Lynette has gotten married. And it turns out that she's married Simon Doyle, the fiance of her childhood best friend. So then part 2 takes place on a beautiful cruise liner that is going down the Nile. And Lynette and Simon are there on their honeymoon, and all of the other characters are there too on holidays. Poirot's on holiday, but we all know Poirot never gets a holiday. So something's going to happen. And Lynette and Simon are just enjoying their honeymoon, and Jacqueline shows up. And it turns out that she has been showing up at various points across their honeymoon, just not doing anything, but just showing up and staring and just almost ruining their honeymoon. Lynette then asks Poirot to have Jacqueline stopped, but Poirot tells a Bible story about a man who had 1 lamb and a man who had many lambs, and the man with many lambs took the lamb from the man who only had 1. And he points out that Lynette had everything and Jacqueline only had Simon. Her family had lost all of their wealth in the Wall Street crash. And at that point, Lynette is sort of like, oh, well, you know, I don't feel guilty, I haven't done anything wrong. But there's that little bit of perhaps you do feel a bit guilty and that's why you want her gone. So drama, of course, unfolds on this journey, and ultimately there is a murder. And the murder victim is Lynette. And it's really interesting because at the start, in the introduction, Lynette says that she doesn't have an enemy in the world. And then, when speaking to Poirot, says that she has enemies everywhere and she doesn't feel safe. And that's kind of true because prior to Lynette's death, there were motives coming out everywhere. And so then Poirot has to look into, well, who killed Lynette? And there are a few very obvious suspects, but there are also so many alibis and people who simply could not have done it. So I'm not 100% sure what the correct terminology would be for this kind of book, this kind of murder mystery, but I think it's kind of like a locked room mystery because the murderer is somebody on that boat. And the boat is in the Nile, so they're not leaving the boat. Nobody's coming on the boat. It has to have been one of them. The thing I loved so much about this book was just the sheer volume of suspects and of motives. And I really enjoyed Poirot investigating this because he just comes into his element when he's investigating a murder. I have read this book many, many times before. I have watched the TV adaptation of this many, many times before. So I know the twist and I know what's coming. But the thing is that I know what's coming, but I don't see it coming because there's no hint that that is what is going to happen. It's just so cleverly done that the reveal every single time I'm like, oh, well done. It's just so good. This book also has a few side stories going on as well, which I really enjoyed, so some additional crimes being investigated, and that brought out a lot of red herrings, which made the investigation even more fun, and it allowed Poirot to, you know, be a little smug because he knew that there were other crimes or that things weren't related to the murder, and I love that. I love Poirot getting a really good chance to shine, and in this book he does say that he is vain and he wants everybody around so that he can announce the murderer. And I just think that that is classic Poirot. And in the style of an amazing Agatha Christie book, everything's sort of tied up neatly at the end. We've got happy endings for a lot of our side characters and the criminals are apprehended. I think that this book is one of the best experiences of Poirot investigating. It's just so clever and he is so clever, and there are moments of comedy in the book and it's just such an enjoyable read. There's a reason that I reread this book regularly and it's because I enjoy it so much. For me, this book was definitely a 5-star read. Let's move on to the film. I had a lot of feelings about going to see this film. I had a lot of feelings about the cast. I had a lot of feelings about the trailers that I'd seen. The film started with us back in 1914 with an introduction to Poirot. Now, this is where I started getting feelings because this intro had Poirot fighting in World War I, which was not the case because in World War I, Poirot was a Belgian refugee in England. That's the canon, and he very much had his moustache and he was an older man. He was not a young moustacheless man fighting in the war. When the film started that way, I sort of thought, oh, you've made some pretty key changes here. And I think that carried on throughout the film. There were a lot of changes. The film also added a love interest, a lost love for Poirot, which was very odd because Poirot is one of the most famous asexual characters in literature. So I don't know, it didn't sit right with me adding something this big into Poirot's character. So then flash forward and Poirot is at a nightclub in the book. He's at a restaurant. He meets Jacqueline, Simon and Lynette, and he sort of sees what he describes as the first act between this trio, where Simon and Lynette sort of, their eyes meet. And this bit got a little bit sexy. Poirot is a lot of things. Agatha Christie is a lot of things. But they're not sexy. So it was a little, well, it was a little bit of a surprise. But I suppose it really helped to display the passion between Jacqueline and Simon. So I will go over the characters from the film now. This was not my Poirot. He was much younger than Poirot would have been in this book. And that's fine. You know, it's Hollywood. You've got people in their mid-30s playing a 20-year-old heiress, so I can suspend my belief here and have Poirot be, I have no idea how old Kenneth Branagh is, but he's substantially younger than Poirot would have been in the book. And he's very quick to accuse everybody of murder. And Poirot famously doesn't accuse people of murder until he's ready to do, you know, his final scene where he's gathered everybody around and gets to be vain. But this Poirot was just accusing left, right and centre, and that just didn't really work with the character of Poirot. He was also, looked nothing like Poirot, but I'm okay with that because we've got, you know, Gal Gadot with her gorgeous brown hair playing a golden haired heiress. So people look different in the films and I understand that. But it wasn't just how he looked. There was an action scene in this film. Poirot was in an action scene. Poirot chased down a shooter. He was rolling about on the floor, dodging bullets. He was throwing cleavers. It was very exciting, but I could not imagine Poirot doing any of that. So this film gave a lot of time to showing us this new version of Poirot and introducing us to the love between Lynette and Simon, which is very passionate to the point that they are dry humping on an ancient Egyptian burial tomb, which seems very disrespectful. And I'm not gonna lie, I feel a bit weird watching that in the cinema by myself with my giant popcorn. But it didn't really introduce the other characters. Part of what I loved about the book was the amount of characters that were there, and in the film they were just there. They didn't really provide too much prior to the murder. They were just plodding around. In the book, the characters are all travelling in their, either in their respective pairs or solo, and I liked that they were not linked, whereas in the film it's a honeymoon cruise. I don't think I would want to go on a honeymoon cruise. That's a lot of time to spend with people. The whole thing about it being a honeymoon cruise really just made me ask questions about why was nobody there for Simon? Does Simon have no friends? And Simon was the youngest son of a lord in the book, so he would have had at least a sibling. There were some pretty huge character changes, not just to Poirot, but some of these changes I loved. So there was quite a tender moment between Lynette and Jacqueline, which I think really enhanced the story. I liked that. It sort of helped to show just how close the two of them were before the sort of, well, quite large betrayal of swiping your friend's fiance. That's kind of a, you know, breaking the girl code. But I did like that moment. I thought it worked well with the established characters, and I could see that happening. I absolutely adored the changes to Marie Van Schuler and Bowers, they were played by Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders, who are comedy legends. I have loved them since I started watching the French and Saunders show back in the 90s. They are amazing actors, they're amazing writers and performers. I think that they were some of the stars of this film. And seeing French and Saunders together again, it just made my heart so happy, and I utterly adored the changes to the characters. It warmed my cold dead heart, and I think that it felt realistic, and I loved it. I also loved the changes to Rosalie and Salome Otterborn. So instead of being a somewhat drunken romance novelist and her very put upon daughter, Salome was a blues singer and Rosalie was her niece and manager. And I thought that this was a really, really good addition to the story because it added a really enjoyable and atmospheric soundtrack to the film that felt in keeping with the time. Of course, Salome was flirting away with Poirot as she does in the book, but in the film Poirot was giving it back, and I don't think Poirot would have flirted. He's not Hastings. Hastings would have flirted back, but Poirot not so much. So there were some changes to the Allertons, which were a little bit strange because they were still the same characters, just with a different name. And I think that that was a tie-in to the previous Kenneth Branagh film adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express. So I think that that was why there was that change, because otherwise I can't see any other reason for changing Tim and his mother for Book and his mother. I thought that the film was visually spectacular. The costumes were amazing. It was just so lavish. It made me think of the Baz Luhrmann, well, anything by Baz Luhrmann, but in particular Great Gatsby. It was just so, it looked dramatic and it looked so lavish. I think that I think that this film looked spectacular. I just don't think that the quality of this film was anywhere near as high as the way that it looked, if that makes sense. It felt like there was very little build up to the murder, and in the book is 50% build up to the murder. By the time the murder happens in the book, you've already got about 5 people you're ready to point your finger at. But in the film, well, there's no motive given for anybody apart from the one person who has, or the 2 people really, that have massive alibis. So it sort of didn't have that element of excitement, and there were other motives that came out, but they didn't come out until after the murder, and when they did get revealed, it was very quick, almost like an afterthought, by which point I must admit I was a little bit bored during this film. Especially the first half of this film, you know, it did get a little bit dull. For me, it was quite repetitive with the, we know it's lavish, we know it's gorgeous, but come on, give us a little bit more story. I do have, in addition to being really annoyed by the way that Poirot was portrayed, I thought that the necklace in this film was one of the ugliest necklaces that I have ever seen. It was hideous. And in the book, it's this gorgeous pearl necklace. It's so valuable and it's gorgeous. And in the film, it's what I can only describe as a monstrosity from Tiffany's. Now, I know Tiffany's is fancy, it's expensive. That necklace costs way more than my house. But that necklace was also the epitome of money can't buy you taste. And I don't know if that was maybe to show some sort of difference between Lynette being new money and Jacqueline being old money previously, I don't know, or maybe it was just a sponsorship deal, but either way, that necklace, it was hideous. There was an epilogue in this film which ripped my knitting. I hated it. It was not Poirot. I think that for a successful adaptation, obviously the script doesn't have to follow the book 100%, but it does need to keep the spirit of the book, the vague plot, and you can't, it didn't work for me, the amount of changes that happened to Poirot, who is one of our main characters, and he's such a beloved and known character that to make all of these changes, just, it was like trying to rewrite Agatha Christie, and that's not cool. I did wonder why this film was made, and I know that that sounds harsh, but I don't understand why, when there exists already a film of Death on the Nile, a film of Murder on the Orient Express, wonderfully beloved TV adaptations, why you would then make a film, because obviously the film is going to be compared to the existing adaptations, and I don't think that I would compare it favourably, because this did not feel like a murder mystery for me, and that is first and foremost what Agatha Christie is and what I love so much about Agatha Christie. But to try and add excitement value to it by having some action scenes, it just, I didn't need that. That didn't do anything for me, and I think that if you haven't read the book or seen any previous adaptations, you might go in and absolutely love this film. But for me, this was an adaptation of something that I love, and I don't think that it was done in a way that I enjoyed. And I know this film wasn't made for me, and nobody really cares what I think about it, but in this case I do feel without a doubt that the book did it better. So with that said, I will thank you for watching if you've made it this far. If you have and you liked it, then feel free to like, and if you want to subscribe, I pop out videos every Sunday. They're not usually me having a rant about that mean film ruining my favourite book. It didn't ruin it. I still love the book. But anyway, thanks for watching. Bye!